This is the eLearn podcast. If you're passionate about the future of learning, you're in the right place. The expert guests on this show provide insights into the latest strategies, practices, and technologies for creating killer online learning outcomes. My name's Laddick, and I'm your host from Open LMS. The eLearn podcast is sponsored by eLearn Magazine, your go-to resource for all things online learning. Click-by-click how-to articles, the latest in edtech, spotlight on successful outcomes and trends in the marketplace. Subscribe today and never miss a post at elearnmagazine.com. And Open LMS, a company leveraging open source software to deliver effective, customized, and engaging learning experiences for schools, universities, companies, and governments around the world since 2005. Learn more at openlms.net. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the eLearn podcast. I hope this finds everyone well, because my actual guest that was supposed to be here today, it does not find her well, and unfortunately, but we have a fantastic person who stepped in her place, Miss Sylvia Spears. How are you today, Sylvia?
I'm great. It's great to be here. Although it wasn't planned, I'm happy to show up and talk about reinventing higher education.
Super cool. Sylvia, tell me, where in the world do we find you sitting?
I am actually in Rhode Island, southern Rhode Island, down by the water in a town called Narragansett, which is actually named after an indigenous community here that I am part of, the Narragansetts.
So that's a Native American nation?
Yeah.
Oh, super cool. Well, and did you? Well, now I'm going to have to ask you about that. So are you a returnee, or is this something that you were kind of born and raised there?
I was born and raised here, stayed here until after college, went to college in Rhode Island, moved away to New York, New Jersey area, and came back once for about a 20-year period, left again for a job at a college in New Hampshire, and then made my way back home. We all come home at some point.
I was just going to say, it seems like we all come home. That's great. Nice. Well, I'm glad to hear that you are back home. And as you said, we're here to talk about reinventing higher education for adult learners. Introduce yourself for us. Like, we know now that you're where you live, but tell us about College Unbound. Tell us about the role that you have there, and just sort of set the stage for us.
Yeah. Well, I'll first share that I've been in higher education. I like to say it's 25 years, but it really is 30 years. So I just kind of, 25 times, not quite so long.
Yeah.
I've been in higher education as a faculty member, an administrator, a dean, a vice president, all of the roles. And in every single college setting, have been working to create an environment that's more accessible, more relational, more supportive of students who come from communities where access to higher ed is typically denied. So doing a lot of work inside higher ed to change higher ed. And one of the things, the longer I went along in my career, what I started to discover is it's really hard to change places that are called institutions. They are institutions for a reason. And they have some, I'll try to be kind, self-perpetuating features.
Sure.
And as a result of those features, they kind of cling to the status quo. Change and movement, absent a disruptive innovation, don't come easily. So for quite some time, I've been saying, I don't know if you can really fundamentally change colleges and universities. I don't know. And some really fabulous colleagues that I used to work with in the role I had before coming to College Unbound used to say to me, Sylvia, I think we got to create a school. We got to build it from scratch. Well, I don't know if I was up for a task of building it from scratch, but I did find College Unbound, where two educational innovators, Dennis Littke and Adam Bush, actually built a college from scratch 14 years ago. And so we're kind of a teenage college in all of the ways that one can imagine that. College Unbound has a fierce, radical educational model. It's designed to allow adult learners for whom education has failed. They have failed. The institutions have failed the learner to achieve their college degree. Not only just any degree, but a degree in organizational leadership and change. We have one major, and the goal is for students to be able to make their way through their learning so that they can create transformative change for themselves, their families, and the community. And so it is an innovative space where things like care, compassion, community, relationships, relevance of a topic area to students' lives are part of our everyday kind of DNA and our life's work there. And so our students are folks who sometimes have had negative experiences in education. Sometimes life happened and got in the way of them finishing their education. And for some students, they've been told that they're not smart, they're not college material, they should go a different track, when in fact, they always were talented, they always were gifted, they always had lots of knowledge and expertise and wisdom to bring to the world. So at CU, we create a space, a container that allows them to discover all of that.
I think we're done. I think that was the conversation. Thank you very much.
If only it was that easy, right? That you could just do it.
Why organizational development and change? Why is that the major? Well,
Yeah.
actually, and before that, give us a sense of how big, like what's the campus or the student body? Is it a
Student
couple
body
hundred thousand?
No, it's about 400.
Okay. All right.
400 with the majority of our students in Providence, Rhode Island, or the Rhode Island area. But we also have cohorts of students in Philadelphia, in Chicago, in Camden, New Jersey, in the Delaware Valley. And we anticipate some cohorts of students evolving in Greenville, South Carolina, and outside of Seattle, Washington.
That's an outlier.
Yeah, strange configuration of things. But it really is where people see need, come into partnership with us, and where we can connect to what's happening in a particular community. The major is a really interesting question because it serves a couple of purposes. From the perspective of the student, in any field, most people have aspirations for, whether it's within the same role or aspiring to a different role, of building their leadership capacity. So students are attracted to it. Employers, that could be in education, housing, government, jobs, any field, are also looking for people who have leadership skills regardless of whether they have a leadership role. So for employers, it makes sense. What's a little different than your average college is that it's all about social change. The ethos of the college is around creating and supporting students to become leaders in their communities in a way that they can address any social concerns that they see as present and affecting their communities. So all students, over the course of their time at College Unbound, develop a core project, and that core project gets cultivated over their time at the college with lots of input from community members, from fellow students, as something that's a change strategy that they can implement. Sometimes it's in their work, sometimes it's in their community, sometimes it's building a brand new nonprofit organization. And that's where our students lean into. How can they use the degree to create change in their lives and change in their community? So that's why organizational leadership and change. They study topics like leadership competencies, but leadership competencies for social justice. They study organizational design and how do you create human-centered design in organizations. They study power and difference. How do you look at a set of societal issues and pay attention to where's the power And we actually do things like power mapping around community issues and problems. And so they're doing some real hands-on work that brings theory and practice together in a powerful way.
I love it. What do you have any like examples over the last 14 years of that you could put on the table of either organizations that have started or projects that people have implemented in their communities?
Yeah, sure. So here's a couple. Um, so we have a student, an alum, who's now actually a member of the faculty. He's gone on to graduate school and done all that kind of stuff, who was formerly incarcerated as a fairly young person. Um, Started on the inside, as they say, inside our carceral environment with CU. We have a prison education program as well. Continued, finished his degree, had a project that he was cultivating around mentoring of African American males.
Mm-hmm.
That program has launched. He's doing it. He's getting lots of support from the community, resources going into it, because everyone knows if you can go, upstream, you can actually create conditions that prevent people from ending up in the path that he ended up in. So we see stuff like that. We've seen some projects around healthy nutrition, where another alum, was observing some of the health issues in her community, and loved to cook. So she created a business of healthy, culturally relevant food, and she's launched a full-on catering business. And the interesting thing is, lots of times we get to hire her to cater for some of our events, which is really cool. Another example is we have an alum, actually Liz, who was scheduled to be here today, who's also on staff, who earlier in her career, did what young families want to do, bought a house, had her kids there, discovered the house had lead paint and in it, and then really created a project around advocacy for safe housing and healthy housing for her entire community, became a statewide, well-known advocate for housing and for the rights of people to have housing in which their families can be safe and can be well. And so Liz is known all over the New England area as an advocate in that area. And it came from her CU project.
That's super cool. Wow. Talk to me about how you've reinvented the process. So, for somebody who's just coming in and listening to this conversation right now, much of what you've said sounds like, socially aware, active college students, right? So take me down the path of what are the key differentiators or maybe different ways of looking at knowledge building or the different questions that you might ask within College Unbound that are real differentiators in your program and your institution.
Yeah. The college is really kind of grounded in three core features, and that is relationships. And we create structures like a cohort-based structure for learning. Relevance of the curriculum, that people are not just studying some abstract concepts for the purpose of saying they know philosophy. They're actually studying things that they are immediately applying to their learning. And we don't assume that students are empty vessels. The average age of our student is 36 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Many of them female, working, raising families, struggling financially, and they have a wealth of knowledge and expertise. And so in any class that our students are in, their knowledge is part of the learning and their shared knowledge with one another, rather than centering the textbook or centering the course materials. The course materials at CU are only provocateurs for engagement and for conversation. They're not learn it by rote, recite it back to us, and voila, you have an A. A lot of the work we do with students is around reflection, being in process, inquiry-based problem posing ways of thinking about learning, where students might have an interest, and then they're starting to bring in ideas and concepts across the curriculum in order to inform the project. We also, rather than thinking of higher education as something where you have to jump through hoops to accomplish, we actually meet students where they are. So yes, we have an admissions process and a recruitment process. And our recruitment process is more interested in what drives you to want to go to college right now? What assets are you bringing? And how can we support you? That's a typical admissions interview. It's not, what grades did you get? It's not, can you give us 5 letters of recommendation? There's none of that. And so it really is, where is this learner on their kind of path to lifelong learning? And are they set up? Are they ready? And being ready often means being willing to unlearn what education is or can be. Because so many of our students have had negative experiences in education or have experienced harm in education, been told they're not smart, they're not bright, they're not college material. And a lot of our work is actually reframing that and supporting them to reframe their own understanding of themselves. So CU also has a lot of built-in reflection in every course. And we have what's called a world and workplace lab that every student meets once a week in this thing called the lab. And the lab is where the cohort lives. They have a faculty member who's more like a facilitator and a guide who helps them make meaning of their shared experience from the other courses that they might be in. And so that lab becomes this incredible kind of nurturing place where a lot of percolation and refinement happens about sense of self. And people really grow into themselves as learners, as talented, and as folks worthy of education. And that's evidenced by students who tell us they never thought they were college material, who go on to graduate school at Ivy League institutions. And so it's telling us that some of the previous educational experiences actually were wrong, did them harm. And part of our model is to reinvent and create a reparative model in higher education that allows people to live and grow into their dreams. And so, and that's what I get to do every day, which is actually pretty cool.
I love it. I'm wondering what who's not a good candidate for College Unbound? Is that a fair question to ask?
Yeah, it is. I think the only humans I can think of who might struggle at College Unbound would be somebody who is unwilling to rethink what learning is. So if somebody thinks the teacher has to be the wise sage on the stage who's going to purvey knowledge and dump it into the empty heads of students, they're going to be really frustrated, because so much of what we do is about process, about being in process together. Occasionally, one of those students is at CU. And what we discover is the beginning of the semester, they're like, I don't understand why we're doing all this reflection. I don't get why can't I just study the material and be done? And by the end of the semester, they're saying, oh, I get it. This is a different way of learning. And as an example, there's a student in my class right now who I met his first day at CU in the fall. Former military guy, currently a Department of Defense contractor, really like in that military mode, has real expectations about how education happens. He was the person who was like, I don't get it. Like, you all are really nice, but I don't get it. Just tell me what I need to know. I'll study it. I'll put it in a paper and I'll give it back to you. And now I have him in class and he says, I didn't know how much I could benefit from reflection and making meaning of my life's experience. He also experienced some really heavy stuff that resulted in PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
And now, not only is it a space where he can bring all of himself, but he can bring all of himself and know that he's got care and support, and he can pour that energy into his project. And so
Sure.
it's really exciting to watch even people who you would think they're just not going to be feeling this, to actually get to the place where they realize the value of reflection.
So what are other typical challenges that maybe a college Unbound student might encounter, or that you as part of the faculty and staff encounter? Like,
Yeah.
what are the roadblocks and hurdles and, I mean, reinventing anything or, start, doing something differently is always a challenge, just, by
Mhm.
definition.
Yeah.
Um, help me understand what some of those are, and what CU has put in place to make sure that students don't fall through the cracks or phase out, of those kinds of things.
Yeah. So from a student perspective, some of the biggest things are things like, a student who hasn't been in an educational setting in 20 years. And what does it mean to even enter into an educational environment? What happens in terms of people's sense of self-esteem? I had somebody in class say, I feel like an imposter, like I'm
Mm.
faking it because, I've been told I don't know how to do college. Um, so that's sometimes an issue. That resolves itself pretty quickly because they see themselves in a community of peers who've traveled maybe not the same exact road, but a similar road. And so we have a lot of support in that lab around that. And that kind of gets normalized. And normalized in that the challenges were not just about you. You didn't fail. It's possible that the system failed you. And so that's important for students to understand. Another thing from the student perspective is technology. Some folks who haven't been in school for a long, long time, and you say, okay, we're going to use, Blackboard or Moodle or, a learning management system. They're like, what are you talking about? Or it's going to be online,
Sure.
and you use terms like synchronous and asynchronous. They're like, could somebody just tell me, what does that mean? I show up at the same time as everybody, or I never see anybody. So some of the technology things tend to be a challenge. And the other thing I would add is our student community right now is about 60% Latinx or Hispanic. And for some students, not only are they first generation college students, they also are students for whom English is not their first language.
Mm-hmm.
And so, all of a sudden, everything you're doing is in English. Although we have lots of Latinx faculty who, even though it's not a requirement, are actually bilingual in class. So those are some of the things that we see as potential challenges for people. And what we've done is we have a couple of different approaches. One is we do kind of a College Unbound intro course, which is designed to translate the college to people, to help people
Okay.
understand the
Mm-hmm.
educational model, to play in the learning management system at a low risk moment, to build confidence and competence around the tools that they need to be successful. We launched what is called a kind of a learning wellness approach, so that people don't think they're doing something wrong or they don't have skill, but they're actually developing the tools to actually have a learning environment and to set a learning environment for themselves that works. And so that helps. And we also have a community care team that attends to the kind of outside of CU classes stuff that comes up. So our students are about 60% of our students are Pell eligible, which means their level of income is pretty modest. And so there are some students who might have housing insecurity or might have food insecurity or are just dealing with complexities of life and need support beyond typical classroom support. And so We have a small team of people who connect folks to resources to make sure folks have housing. We can't provide it, but we can sure do a lot of connecting of people to folks in community-based organizations that we know that when we call, they actually pick up the phone. And so sometimes we have support like that. And I'll give you an example. There was a student who reached out, this is maybe a year ago, who without notice was kicked out of his apartment, kind of a younger student, kicked out of his apartment. The first place he called was College Unbound and said, and he was saying, I won't be in class tonight because I've been kicked out of my apartment. I don't have anywhere to go, so I can't come to class. Within about 15 minutes, two members of the College Unbound student success team were at his house, helped him move stuff out of his house, while other people were in the car on the phone, connecting to a local nonprofit to find him secure housing.
Wow.
It happened, and that evening he was in class. So it's a different kind of responsiveness and care that we wrap around the student, because we have the whole student. And every college I've ever worked at talks about the holistic development of students. And none of them would have ever done what our community care team did that night. And so it really is a much more holistic approach. And if the student is safe and healthy and secure, then they can do their best learning. And so we work to make sure that we can help them to do that.
This definitely sounds like a community as well that would be self-sustaining, right? If I'm going to make it through the CU system, I'm a believer.
Yeah.
Do you find that people are, you mentioned earlier one person's alumni came back and, is teaching now. And are you finding that it's a self-growing community that's kind of replicating in that way?
Yeah, a third of CU staff, just our staff, are alums. And actually, we want it that way. I have a dream at some point that the board of trustees is all an alumni board, because I think who better to lead the college than folks who've been through the experience. And that's very different than what I would have said at some other colleges. We have alums who've gone on and gotten their master's degrees who are now teaching. Our first alum who has become a member of the senior team made it through, worked as director of enrollment, director of admissions, and now is assistant vice president for community and belonging, and brings all of the real knowledge to our senior team, and will say, that's not going to work. When we come up with some idea we think is broke, that's not going to work. That's not working. And so the alums in our community actually keep us honest and with our eye really on the mission. There's one other area, or at least one other major area where alums come into, and that is we have a program. I mentioned the lab and lab faculty and that experience. We have an alumni mentor program where recent grads partner with a faculty member to support a cohort.
Cool.
And those folks often go on to be lab faculty. And so they end up running their own lab, which means they have their own group of 10 students. And the lab faculty stay with those students until they graduate. And so it's not just that they're signing on for a semester. They're actually saying, I'm committed to being in relationship with this next group of CU students until they finish. And that it's such a wonderful place of support. And the alums are, they all talk about paying it forward. And that's what we see. So they're always looking for, I want to work at CU. I want to be engaged, in some way, shape, or form at CU. And now that we have folks all over the country, and our recent grads in Philadelphia, there are people who are helping us grow CU in other locations, which is wonderful.
What happens when you go to other education conferences and are, speaking with other people from other institutions and those kinds of things? Or is it fascination? Is it, I can't see how you guys do that. This isn't sustainable. Is it, gosh, I'd like to come work there? Like, what are the reactions that you get, and, the conversations you would have with your peers?
It ranges from curiosity So like, wow, how can you do that? Those kinds of questions. Or are you accredited? You
Mhm.
know,
Yeah.
and the answer is yes. You know? But they almost think that you can't possibly be this innovative and still be within the bounds of accreditation. And trust me, that's a delicate walk that we walk when the college applied for accreditation, because we wanted to make sure we continue to be who we are.
Right.
But it's really important for our students to be able to say that CU is a college that's accredited the same way Brown University is, through the same mechanisms, against the same measures and standards. And it also gives students access to federal financial aid, and that's really important. So it's either kind of a disbelief, how are you doing this? Or it's just, oh my gosh, this is the kind of work I've always wanted to do all of my life.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
those people often end up being uh, part-time faculty who teach a course or two. And then we hope they take some of CU's educational philosophy back into their home institution.
Super cool. Amazing. What's the next, you said you're growing. I mean, you mentioned Seattle, you said Philadelphia, Delaware Valley, you said Greenville, South Carolina. Is it continued expansion, or is there a new degree program? Like what's the next 3 to 5 years look like for college?
Yeah, it's funny. We have lots of conversations about exactly that, 3 to 5 years, and getting really clear about what that means. Um, we do get asked if we will ever do a master's program, and I think at the moment that's not on our radar screen. Um, but our growth is really around kind of three pathways. One is, do we have more places and more people? And we are starting to do that, but we want to make sure we're doing that in a manner that allows us to retain fidelity to the model.
Mhm.
That we're all having all kinds of feelings about Seattle. There's great people there, and it's really far. And
Sure.
how
Yeah.
can we ensure and support that community in doing this work in this model in the way that we want to? So there's more people, more places, and how do we very thoughtfully think through that, with a longish term goal of 1,000 students in their various satellites. We also are growing kind of national, kind of purpose-based cohorts. So some of the folks who come into CU are interested in housing. They're interested in education and change in those spaces. They're interested in kind of prison education programs. And our hope is to bring cohorts of people together across the country, because we do rely a lot on online learning, methodologies for our instructional courses. And so what would it look like to bring people from who work in public housing, who live in public housing, and who are interested in housing policy together into a
Right.
cohort? So we're
Mhm.
starting to grow that way as well. And then the kind of third piece is really around, how do we exercise influence? So growth not in numbers or breadth, but how do we circulate this innovative approach to higher ed so that other folks can benefit from it? That we're not the little school in Rhode Island that's doing it, but that people are growing it in fugitive spaces in traditional colleges, and then growing their own environments so that there's more opportunity for more people.
I love it. Sylvia Spears, this has been a delightful conversation. I love your passion. You have clearly found your place. Yeah, and it sounds, College Unbound just sounds like a great institution for people who, maybe have been left behind, maybe could not find their way, or maybe were not a good fit for what we would consider more traditional pathway. But I'm very excited to see where you're going in the future. And thank you very much for being a guest on the show today.
Thanks so much. It was so much fun to hang out with you.
Yeah.